Hello, and welcome to Presenting, a podcast where we chat about various topics related to role playing games, typically Paizo products such as Pathfinder and Starfinder, but also others. I'm John Godek, and with me today is Jacob Blackmon. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great to connect with you. And one of the reasons why I'm excited is because you've actually done the artwork for our 2 seasons that we've had of Intrepid Heroes. And so it's like everybody, that's one of the things for my players. One of the ways I get them really juiced up is to get new art from them. And so I really appreciate what you've done for us. And we'll actually circle back at the end here, and you can tell other people how they can get art as well.
Fantastic.
So, Jacob has worked as a freelance artist for over 10 years, working with companies such as Fainting Goat Games,
Mhm.
Misfit Studios, Wright Publishing, and Rogue Genius Games. He has dipped his toes into writing with Lunar Nights and the superpowered bestiary, which I have here. Jacob's current project is the Superpowered Legends series for the Mutants and Masterminds RPG. You can find a collection of Jacob's work at prodigyduck.deviantart.com. And if you'd like to support Jacob, you can find him at his Patreon, which is patreon.com/Jacob Blackmon. First of all, I want to say I really love Mutants and Masterminds. So I'm really excited for the new project that you're working on there. I interviewed Nicole a while back and
Mhm.
talked to her about that. And I've interviewed Owen as well. So I'm really excited. I like Mutants and Masterminds. I just haven't got a game in. So
Well, I do have a fun, moderately well-known Starfinder product that you might have heard of, as
hmm,
the Starfarers expanded bestiary, where or legacy bestiary, where I converted a bunch of monsters that hadn't been taken from Pathfinder yet and brought them into Starfinder and gave them some fun Starfindery backgrounds
yep.
to get them native to alien worlds and that sort of thing.
I've seen that, but I also have kind of related to that back here on my shelf. I believe this is your artwork as well in the
Absolutely.
Advanced Occult Guide. So,
Absolutely.
from Alex Agunas Everybody Games. Yeah, your artwork is very distinct, very distinct. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see it everywhere. And actually, how I got connected with you, I was looking for art for our podcast, and it was Alex that recommended I get you. So that worked out really, really
Fantastic.
well. So Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your journey to becoming an RPG artist and writer now?
Oh boy. I'm curious if you want the full version or the abridged version.
Well,
uh
the full version, I think, is what people really want to know. They want to get to know the real, authentic you.
okay. Well, I've always been pretty heavy into illustrating. I got into comic books in around 1988 with the Transformers. Yes, I started with non-superhero comics. My favorite titles back in the day were like Transformers and Star Trek. I was a big
Mhm,
sci-fi geek.
mhm.
I didn't actually get into superhero comics until the release of the Jim Lee X-Men #1. That was in 1991.
All right. Yes, I remember that.
um, let's see, I was 14 at the time. That is about the
Mm,
time where I discovered role-playing games, thanks
mhm.
to my friends, my best friends at the time, Alphonse Kea and Justin Clark. They introduced me to D&D, and I was like, I don't have to be the strange overweight loser at school. I get to be a heroic knight and fight evil things, and oh wow, this is amazing. I was hooked. So you fast forward basically to the release of Magic the Gathering in '93 and the subsequent trading card boom that happened after that, where
Mhm.
everyone's releasing their own collectible trading card game. And uh, my hometown, we had a game. The game spot was called North Coast Role Playing. Shout out to Barry Osser. And he was producing his own magazine
Hmm.
called the Collectible Games Monthly, and that is where I did pretty much my first gaming art. I looked at some of the stuff out of Magic the Gathering and a couple other pieces and tried to emulate a few styles in there. And some of those art pieces that I did went into his magazine. And that's pretty much my first official credit.
Hmm.
After that, it's a lot of mostly just commission work here and there for individual people until the the D20 boom in the early 2000s, when the open gaming license
Hmm.
just gave us this golden age of independent creators and developers for gaming. And it was a really great time to see all this imagination, creativity come about thanks to the open gaming license.
Hmm. Hmm.
And of course, people needed artists then. And I was contacted by Owen Casey Stevens to work with a company that he was with at the time called Interactive Design Adventures. And I did a few pieces for him there. And I was noticing that there were a lot of independent books that were about like vampires and
Hmm.
mummies and all the fun little Ravenloft creatures, but nothing like lycanthropes and werewolves, which was a subject I knew quite a bit about. And so I decided to produce something that was called Lunar Nights.
Hmm.
And I get this together. I get a nice manuscript. I get all the art together, and it's really early in my art career. So, if you ever find a copy of Lunar Nights and see all my work in it, just
Hmm.
please forgive me. I was young. And I turn all this into Owen, and they love it, and they publish it. And 2 weeks after it's released, Wizards of the Coast announced we're not doing 3.0 anymore. We are now doing D&D 3.5.
Hmm.
So the book flops because no one wants
Oh,
any of the old rule
right,
stuff
right,
anymore,
right, right,
because
right.
these new rules are coming out and it's going to change everything. The new N 3.5 was honestly better.
Hmm.
A lot of the
Yes.
changes they made really helped the system. There was a lot of broken stuff with 3.0. So unfortunately, my first foray into game writing kind of flopped pretty hard. It received a couple of nice reviews, and I thank people for picking up my product and giving me the reviews I did. But it is what it is. So again, we fast forward a couple of years. I'm mostly doing a couple of things here and there. I'm not really getting a lot of stuff in the gaming industry. Most of the stuff I'm doing is for individual people. And
Hmm.
then I'm contacted by Mike Lafferty, who at the time was working for a company called, I believe, Valiant Press, and they were doing some
Wow.
superhero-based
Wow. Yeah.
adventures. And I start doing some work for them, and I do some more work for them. Mike eventually leaves the company and forms his own company, Fainting Goat Games, and I continue doing work for him. And eventually, Owen starts doing work for Super Genius Games and starts coming to me for some bestiary projects, because artists that he had hired for these projects totally flaked on him. He knew I was fairly fast as
Hmm.
an artist and really needed work done this week. Like a
Wow.
dozen creatures in less than a week. And I was
Wow.
like, I'll see what I can do, and I do it. They're very happy. It happens again like 2 to 3 weeks later, where another artist flakes on them. They come to me asking me to do art. I get it done in this insane schedule, and I start becoming their go-to emergency artist.
Mm, mm.
Later on, they start coming to me for regular projects which I'm very thankful for, so I don't have to have the insane schedule.
Yes. Yes.
And that pretty much continues for a while until the day Owen and Steve Russell, uh, who has since passed on, are doing a podcast, and they're talking with some other artists about their favorite artists to work with in the industry, and my name gets brought up. And that weekend, I am pretty much working for like one or two companies to working for over a dozen RPG companies
Wow.
on various different projects.
Hmm.
I'm working for Christina Stiles. I'm working for Adventure a Week. It just it blows up from there, and that is pretty much what I've been doing since then. I had a job, a day job, dishwashing, and then one day Christina Stiles says, I'm going to hire you as the sole artist on this one project. What is your price for this many pieces? And it's like, oh, okay, if I'm going to be working on that many pieces, I'm going to need half up front because it's going to take me a long time to
Hmm.
do all that. And she agrees. And with that money, I quit my job because it is more money than I have ever had.
Hmm.
Uh, and it has since allowed me that freedom to move from part-time freelance artist to full-time freelance artist. That project, by the way, was the Guide to Witches. Strange Brew is what it was called.
Okay.
Strange Brew. And yeah, since then I have been a full-time illustrator for the tabletop industry. I've worked on a number of projects for, like I said, over a dozen companies, which for a lot of people is usually unheard of. The most artists that I speak to work with maybe two or three, perhaps as many as six different companies. So the fact that I've had so many different people come to me for art has just been a blessing. It's been wonderful. I've worked on fantasy projects, sci-fi projects, horror, superheroes, post-apocalyptic and aftermath stuff, all sorts of different genres, and it's really helped me improve my portfolio. And yeah, that's where we pretty much find ourselves today. I'm continuing to work full time. I've managed to not only do work as an illustrator, but I've started doing more and more writing as well. I pretty much specialize mostly in things like bestiaries because I love monsters. I love working on monster projects. So
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
things like bestiaries and NPC books. Those are my favorite things to do.
Now, you don't have your own publishing company, though, do you?
I do not. Everything I do has been through other companies. Primarily when I'm doing stuff that I write for, it's been through um, Rogue Genius Games
Hmm.
and Fainting Goat Games, with a couple of things through Misfit Studios as well, under
Hmm.
Christina Stiles.
It just seems like one of the most expensive things for projects is the art, and you
Mhm.
have that. So it's like, man, you could be turning out all kinds of stuff yourself if you wanted to. So that's it just seems like a great opportunity.
It is certainly fun, and it's helpful, especially when I'm writing a project and having that knowledge of what I want the art to look like. I
Mhm.
can do that.
Right, right. Now, how did you learn how to draw in the first place? I presume your it's pencil or pen and ink, and
Mhm.
now you've transitioned to digital. So,
Yes.
can you talk about how you learned, how you kind of got better at it, and then that transition?
Absolutely. Uh, when I first started, I pretty much was have been drawing since I was a kid. I really got known for it uh, when I was like 7 years old.
Mhm.
I became that art kid in school because whenever I wasn't working on a school project or something, I was drawing. So and I think the earliest drawing I can remember doing was a picture of Ultraman, who's
Yeah.
a very popular Japanese superhero. He
Mhm.
fights kaiju, and
Yeah.
it was a really neat looking characters with his red and silver
Yeah.
outfit.
Yeah.
So I really like the look of that and how dynamic it was, and so that was like I said, one of the first pictures that I can remember doing, and with my love of things like the Transformers and GI Joe and Robotech and all those amazing '80s cartoons, I was really inspired to draw more stuff like that.
Mhm.
And, and like I said, I didn't discover comics until I was like 11 years old and
Mhm.
14. So I didn't actually start doing anything like superheroes until much later.
Mhm. Now, have you had any formal training, or you're all self-taught with this?
No, this is pretty much all self-taught. I had a couple of other artist friends who showed me some of their techniques, and apparently the way I hold my pencil is weird because I don't know how it's weird. It's just how I hold it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I started just regular pencil and paper, pen and ink. I read How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I
Yeah.
had the
Yeah. I remember that.
videotape for it as well
Mhm.
with Stan Lee and his exuberance, and he was just
Mhm.
fascinating. And yeah, I tried to emulate the styles later on when I discovered comic books. I tried to emulate the styles of the artists who I really liked, and going into the '90s, the
Mm.
'90s boom of
Right.
comic books as an artist was a fascinating time because there were some really good artists
Yeah, I got
during that
really
era,
good in the '90s.
and a couple of the really bad ones as well. So you had to really be careful whose style you decided to emulate.
Mhm. Mhm.
And later on, I was gifted, thankfully, a digital tablet, and I had already had some experience working with Photoshop for doing coloring and some some photo alterations. So when I got the tablet and I could just draw on the screen utilizing Photoshop, I knew how to manipulate some techniques and some styles and
Mhm.
uh, put what I had learned with that skill into my illustration, and it has not only made me faster as an artist,
Mhm.
which I didn't think was possible, but I'm able to do some special effects things now utilizing the digital medium that I was
Mhm.
never ever able to do
Mhm.
with pen and paper.
Like some of the transparency stuff, I imagine, and things like that?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. The
Yeah.
transparency background,
Mhm.
you know, the way you can make one layer
Right.
uh, slightly translucent,
Right.
so you can get those ghosts effects. I
Mhm.
can draw the ghost entirely solid,
Right.
and then I just adjust that layer where you can see the background and everything behind the ghost, and that suddenly makes it creepy.
Yeah, that's what I was just looking at for the advanced occult guide, that there's this ghost up here, and I'm thinking, yeah, that'd be really hard to do that translucent. I mean, you could do it, but it basically would be a line drawing
Yeah.
over something. So this is much more detailed. You mentioned so in the '90s you got into comic books, and you mentioned Jim Lee in particular. Do you have a favorite comic book artist? So I'll ask you that, and also looking at your style and when you started, so you came in after Jack Kirby, which was obviously a big Marvel guy. What's your thoughts on his style? So tell me your favorite, then your thoughts on Jack Kirby.
Okay. Well, my I would have to say my favorite artist all time. I have to hand that to Masamune Shiro,
Hmm.
who is a Japanese illustrator who's the creator of some amazing series like Appleseed, Dominion Tank Police, but these days he's mostly known for Ghost in the Shell,
Oh, okay.
which
Right. Right.
is he's very definitive in his cyberpunk
Hmm.
style and cyberpunk stories, and he had a huge influence on
Hmm.
my art because I discovered him really early in my teenage years, and I continue to collect his books to this day.
Hmm.
He produces art books pretty regularly, and I continue to collect them. They're just amazing.
Hmm.
Um, as for Jack Kirby, yeah, Jack Kirby is an excellent artist, and he pretty much defined what it was to be a comic artist at the time. The fact that you have to be quick, you have to be creative,
Hmm.
uh, you have to be able to work big, you have to be able to work small. He pretty much defined all that. But in the same manner, I will also say that while I love Kirby for who he was and what he did, uh, I don't think his art is great.
Yes,
I think
I
he as an
agree.
artist, I think he as an artist
Yes.
was
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
but I'm not a big fan of his actual style.
Yeah.
Because if you look at his actual style, he's got the punchy things. It's like four tires
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
at the end of a lump.
Yeah.
Instead of that doesn't look like a fist. That looks
Yeah, he
like
doesn't have
four
he doesn't have a
tires at
lot of
the end of a lump.
definition in it, you know? And the reason why I bring it up is, you mentioned, Jim Lee. I remember, so Jim Lee, and then who was doing the early Spider-Mans then? Um,
That was McFarlane.
yeah, oh, yeah,
McFarlane was
McFarlane.
doing Spider-Man at the time.
Yeah, and so looking at those, I mean, that's it's such beautiful artwork.
Hmm.
The Spider-Man, the new series they did, that the first issue did, I have like, they had like a gazillion different covers. I have all of them, and all the different colors and things. And it's just so gorgeous. And I just look at that in contrast. I started collecting comic books in the early 70s. And
Mm.
so that was a lot of Jack Kirby influence, for all those things. And then you would get, through the 80s, every once in a while, you get like Neil Adams is an early comic book
I
artist that
love Neil
was
Adams' work.
really gorgeous. And so for me, I actually collected comic book artists. That's kind of how I collected a bunch of books, but then you'd get specific artists for things. So I was just kind of curious, the thoughts on it, because I saw Stan Lee did a retrospective talking about Marvel and start of Marvel, and he talked about the importance of Jack Kirby and what he did and everything. And I agree. I think he did a tremendous job there. It's just not a style now that I, that I find very appealing. You
Hmm.
know, so I was just kind of curious because I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an expert artist, so I thought, I'll ask somebody who knows. So kind of speaking of the art you do, so you do lots of different genres.
Hmm.
Um, does your style change each time you take on, like some of your westerns that you have, or when you're doing sci-fi, or you're doing horror, or where you're doing fantasy? I notice when I see the different things you're working on, there's a lot of similarities. I'm just kind of curious how you frame or change your style to fit those contexts.
My style does change subtly. Yes, I do have and am known for a distinctive style of artwork,
Mhm.
and I try to have that in whatever project I do because people come to me for a reason. They want
Mhm.
that work. But yes, there are differences that one needs to change their style. based on the project that they're doing. I get some work for the old school Renaissance RPG crowd, and in that context, they want the black and white style art.
Mm.
And
Right, right, right.
when you're working black and white as opposed to color, which is my normal medium, you have to think much more about what the shading is going to look like,
Mm.
the dark spots and the light spots, and where and all that sort of thing, and how instead of doing shading just in giant black blotches, having the cross hatching or like the
Right.
woodwork line strokes for
Hmm.
that sort of thing, because that's the kind of art that people want to see for the old school style art, especially for the old school fantasy art. For science fiction, you want a little more poppy. You want things bright and flashy,
Hmm.
unless of course it's supposed to be one of those dark, gritty, grim futures.
Hmm.
But for my personal style of science fiction, things should be brightly lit, and there should be light on the clothing and reflective
Hmm.
panels and pockets and all that, and gadgets and doodads that people have. So yeah, there are changes that need to be done based on what project you're working on. Absolutely. And how your technology is going to look, of course.
Right, right, right. Can you tell us a little bit about Superpowered Legends that you're working on now and the kind of that series that's going on?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Superpowered Legends is my love letter to Marvel Comics. When Mutants and Masterminds was released for their third edition, they had the license for DC Universe as a
Mm.
world. So they created a DC role playing game, and they used the new third edition Mutants and Masterminds rules for these characters, these iconic Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, all these amazing characters, and they released several books, including two roster books that just pretty much had almost any and every DC character you could imagine.
Mhm, mhm.
And of course, here are the fans saying, "Why don't you release Marvel as well?" Well, because they didn't have the license for Marvel.
Right.
Meanwhile, on the Mutants and Masterminds forum, uh, there are these pages and pages and pages of fans like myself who are writing characters from everything. Here's our variant DC write-ups, how we would write them instead of how Green
Mhm,
Ronin wrote them. Here's our Marvel characters, and uh, here's our characters from these different independent comic book series, and here's how we would write up characters from this anime series. And I became known on those forums for my bestiary, because I was writing up every creature, whether it was animal, mythological monster, uh, transferred over from D&D. I quickly became known for that, and after I had written up every monster I could think of, I started writing Marvel characters because
mm.
Marvel was always my comic book
Yeah, same here.
universe.
Yeah.
I the like the first, like I said earlier before, the first superhero comic I got was X-Men, and I stuck with Marvel pretty much exclusively after that. I've read some DC. I can tell you all about DC, but Marvel is always what is closest to my heart. And after I had written up all these Marvel characters, uh, including some really, really obscure characters, uh, Owen Stevens was looking at all this work I had done. Is like, you know, if you filed off the serial numbers, gave these characters entirely different names, backgrounds, and you did new art for them, I'm like, all of them, all of them. Oh boy, you might be able to sell a product like for this. And I thought about it. I decided not to. Then I thought about it again, and I decided to try it. And I released Recluse, who is my homage to Spider-Man, and I pretty much did. And I pretty much labeled it as, if you want to create a friendly neighborhood web slinging spider powered hero for mutants and masterminds, this is how you do it. And it sold very well. The following week, I released Redcap, who was a crazy guy with a goblin mask who throws bombs and flies around on a bat shaped little flying platform. Guess who he is? And it sold very well.
Wow.
And I was so inspired by what I had started doing. I was writing a manuscript and drawing anywhere from 2 to 3 characters each day for about the first month. I
Wow.
had a backlog of these things.
Wow. Yeah.
I sent them to Dropbox to Owen and LJ for them to look over, edit, and compile into PDFs. And they pretty much released one a week for a couple of years. And it just kept selling and selling well. And I was very happy, and that people were liking the character build homages. They were liking the different backgrounds. It's not the Marvel universe, but it has that feel of the Marvel
Right.
universe. So people were very happy to finally get Marvel characters with mutants and masterminds.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we released a collected book with like the first 200 characters that I had built, and that is the Superpowered Legends source book. And I've continued to produce Superpowered Legends PDF since then. Uh, we're about since the first one, I have released an adventure. Oh, two adventures. Uh, a and I think about 80 new characters on individual PDFs since our first collected volume, which had like
Wow.
250 characters in it.
So, what's your favorite Marvel character, and then what's the most obscure one that you've done?
Oh, I would be hard pressed to say who my favorite Marvel character is. Um, I honestly, I like the powers and grandioseness of Thor, but I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the comics and adventures that Thor tends to go on. If I was a Thor writer, I might do different things for him. I tend to think Thor does too much in Asgard,
Mm.
whereas
Hmm.
superheroes need to be in the public view. They need
Hmm.
to be doing they need to be doing things that people can see them do. Whereas a lot of Thor adventures are in outer space or in
Yeah.
Asgard or where people don't know where he is or what he's doing.
Hmm.
And this is also one of the problems that I have with like X-Men is they are so insular. Is
Yeah.
like we're only dealing with mutant problems. Then you're ruining the whole point of you being X-Men. The point of the X-Men is to be a superhero team in the public eye who are mutants to show that mutants are good and can use their powers for good. Whereas if all you're doing is handling mutant problems in your insular little circle, you have defeated the purpose. So, my little rant there. But yeah, Thor. I would have to say Thor.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking of this question. I like the X-Men a lot. I collected them a long time. I used to have the original X-Men, like I think down to number issue 3. So I mean that far. Um, I like Rogue a lot.
Oh
Um,
yes.
Rogue post Miss Marvel, I guess. Just kind of a really
Yes.
interesting skill set and powers. And the character usually is kind of really, really kind of cool. But okay, what's an obscure character that you've developed then?
Oh, are you familiar with Grizzly?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, then that's not obscure enough. um, yeah, Grizzly would have been my go-to
Okay.
because when I found him, I was like, who the heck is this? He's a guy in a bear suit.
Right. Have you done like all of Alpha Flight and stuff like that? And
I have not yet done Alpha Flight, but I have plans for Alpha Flight.
okay,
Yes.
because I think they would be like Puck and Sasquatch. Those guys are kind of obscure for most traditional Marvel folks.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, they're kind of interesting backstory, for things. Interesting. All right. So, I had some commission work done by you, which turned out fantastic. You were very responsive, very quick when we suggested changes. I remember at the end of our second set, I was trying to do group picture and I had you do like multiple iterations to get it right. Um, can you talk about how, if somebody wants to get commission work done, how they would do that? And while you're doing that, tell me what Prodigy Duck means too.
Okay. Well, to get that quickly done, Prodigy Duck was was the email address that I had to develop real quick when I first discovered email. At the time, it was more popular to use a internet handle as
Mm,
opposed to utilizing your real name.
yeah.
And so that's pretty much what I did because I didn't think ahead that maybe someday I would be known more popularly as Jacob Blackmon.
Right. Right. Right.
So at the time I was developing my first email, uh, I was listening to the band Prodigy. But I figured I couldn't just use Prodigy. I was sure, just one word wasn't going to go through. And then I'm looking around the room, and behind me, my roommates are watching a Daffy Duck cartoon.
Okay.
So I type in Prodigy Duck.
Okay. All right.
Email name accepted. And that's the magic of my imagination there for an internet handle.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, if I knew then what I knew now, I would be using my own name.
Yeah.
But that is what it is. um, as for commission work, anyone who wants to get a hold of me for commissions. I have several social media means that they can get a hold of me. I'm active on Facebook. I'm active on Twitter currently.
Yes, I hear you
That
on
may be
that.
less later.
Yeah.
Um, and I also have a presence on DeviantArt, and on all of those pages, on my front face page, my profile page is you may have to pan down a bit, but it's there. Is my rate sheet, and on my rate sheet is contact information, what my rates are for what size of piece do you want, whether it's an individual character illustration or something larger. I have stuff for between individual character illustrations to if you want this to be a cover piece for your book. I have rates for all of that on there.
Mhm.
And like I said, the contact information is on there as well. send me an email. Ask me if is do you have time? Is I would like something like this, and if you haven't seen my rate sheet, I will quote you a price. And yeah, that's pretty much that. I usually allow a little back and forth between the rough. There's usually a back and forth process
Hmm.
between the rough draft process and the final piece for changes and alterations here and there. But that's pretty typical because the it's fairly rare when a rough draft is like, go with that. Yes, that is
Yeah.
perfect.
Good. Good to know because we always seem to make a couple changes there. I will say I found you very quick in terms of when you could commit. Your timeline was very quick compared to a lot of other people I talked to. Because when I first contacted you, I think about our second season, you were too busy at the time,
Mhm.
and so I started looking other places. And then when I circled back, or maybe you even contacted me, then you had availability. So it was kind of an interesting thing there. But I also found that your prices were very competitive too. So, in fact, lower than some lesser known folks, I'll say, out there. So I would highly recommend anybody interested in getting commission pieces, or in our case, this was like stuff for our podcast. It wasn't like we're just doing it for our characters. I find it very, very reasonable and quick. Um, do you have advice for folks that are interested in becoming freelance artists and writers as well?
Oh, absolutely. I've thought long and hard of the kind of stuff I would talk about if ever I'm on like a convention panel. So my advice is well practiced and rehearsed. Um, Treat it like a job, because this is your job. If you are going to be a freelance illustrator, work your work hours, and otherwise take your time off.
Mm,
Take breaks in the day, take your lunch during the day. Don't work from the time you get up to the time you go to bed. It's your job. Work 8 hours, then stop
mm,
and have the rest of the day to yourself. The only time I tend to break that rule for myself is if I'm close to having a project done, or maybe I'm a little behind. But I try not to break those rules as a general rule, because otherwise I'll find myself getting into deep trouble with my mental health.
mhm, mhm,
But yeah, treat it like a job. Make sure you stay in communication with your clients so they know realistic timetables. Uh, make sure you have that rate sheet,
mhm.
because that way you're not telling one client
Right,
a different price than you're telling another client, because you never know. It's like who's talking to who. It's like, hey,
right.
I contacted Jacob Blackmon. He said he'd do that for $50. I contacted Jake Black. He said he'd do the same thing for $75. That jerk. Let's lynch him.
Mhm,
That sort of thing. Um, so yeah, make sure you have proper communication, proper channels. Um, Uh, and yeah, take your mental health breaks. Treat it like a job. Uh, if you don't have a contract, try to make sure that you're working with people who you can trust, or or make sure they can have a contract for you. Uh, so far, I have been lucky with the people I've worked with. There have been a couple of cases where I've done some pieces without a contract, and I've not received any money for,
mm.
hundreds of dollars of work that I've done,
Wow.
because they just took the art and left. We didn't have a contract, and that there's nothing I can do about that.
Mhm, mhm,
So be careful with who you work for. And this is another reason why, if I am working on a particularly big project, or even if I'm working on a small project with someone who I'm not familiar with, I'll usually ask for half up front,
Right.
non-refundable, and I will specifically make that this is for my time that I'm going to be putting in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Whether you accept the the rough draft or not, this is money I get to keep
Mhm. Mhm.
because that's the work I'm initially putting in.
Yeah. No,
And
I think that's a fair prospect. Yes.
yeah, that's mostly what I have in terms of advice for writers and artists.
I have another question, and it's not on the overview, but it's something I've been thinking about and asking folks more often. How did COVID affect you and your work that you were doing?
Oh, oh. Uh, it it did. Staying indoors for long periods of time has not been great.
Mhm.
I am in terrible physical shape because of COVID, and uh, due to the fact that the weather has gone incredibly extreme in these post-COVID years. We're not post-COVID. We're still in COVID.
Mhm.
I haven't been able to get out and exercise as much as I used to because either the weather's too hot or too cold, and so I can't get my steps in. It's
Mhm.
very difficult to do that. Um,
What about as
but
an artist?
as an artist, I hate to say it, but 2020 was one of my best financial years. A lot of people were having problems
Mm.
in that year because they couldn't go to work. Meanwhile, I had one of the best years I've ever had.
Yeah, I talked to a couple publishers, and they kind of said the same thing. They couldn't get paper content. They couldn't get paper actually to publish
Yeah,
on, but PDFs.
yeah,
They just went through the roof because a lot of folks were at home. A lot of folks were playing games remote, and they needed content. And I that's why I was kind of curious to see if that kind of so those folks were needing more art.
absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Right. So what's next for Jacob? What kind of cool things are you working on now besides your superpowered legends that you continue to work on?
Besides that, I have a few projects that I'm working on. There are some new projects that are soon to be released by Fainting Goat Games. Uh, there were some fun games that were released by Bloat Games. Eric Bloat is an amazing game writer, and he writes fun games. These games may not be complex or huge tour de force world changing games, but they are fun to play because just some of the concepts. Like I've been a huge Transformers fan, and
Hmm.
there hasn't been a Transformers RPG, but he released a RPG called Valor Knights: The Electrocube Wars, and uh, me and Mike Lafferty of Fainting Goat Games ran with this. We produce our own, and because Eric Bloat wrote it with an OGL,
Right.
we started making our own characters. We started writing adventures, and so we have a Champions of the Electrocube War product out right now, which has a bunch of characters that we've written up, and we're about to start releasing adventures that we've written for the Electrocube Wars. We're going to be doing that soon. Another game that Eric Bloat wrote was The Monsters Are Our Heroes. And this is where you're playing some of like classic Universal monsters: vampires, werewolves, the Invisible Man, Frankenstein's monster, Gillman, uh, and you are these creatures as player characters, and you're fighting strange Cthulhu monsters and
Mm.
cryptids
Hmm.
and others type of creatures like that, mythological monsters, like the children of the Titans, and you're basically you are the things that go bump in the night that protect humanity from the worst things that go bump in the night.
from the real monsters out there. Yeah.
Exactly. And I've written an expanded bestiary because in his initial book, there's like maybe a dozen monsters in there. I
Yes.
wrote like 3 dozen, three or 4 dozen creatures. Gave made some new illustrations, and we're about to release the Monsters Are Our Heroes expanded bestiary soon through Fainting Goat Games.
Awesome.
Um, Besides that, let's see. Owen recently contacted me with all the art that I've been doing for Inktober. I've been doing with based on the prompts for Inktober. I've been doing a lot of new monster art. So there's this new gargoyle piece that I did, and there's this bat monster and these pumpkin monsters and all these strange little things. And one of these days the prompt was camping, and so I basically did a tent mimic.
Okay.
But Owen contacted me and said, do you want to do a series of monster products based on all these Inktober pieces you did? And I was like, honestly, yeah, I think it would be a fun project. Just like all these fun little Halloween monsters would be fun to do as a bestiary. And it's like I've become familiar enough with like the fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons
Hmm.
rules, and I already know things like Starfinder and Pathfinder One. I'm
Hmm.
not big. I don't really know the Pathfinder Two rules as big, but I could certainly do bestiary versions of these Halloween monsters for at
Mm-hmm.
least those 3 systems that I'm
Right.
familiar with. And Owen says that sounds great, and I should be able to find people who could do conversions for like Pathfinder 2, maybe like Savage Worlds,
Hmm.
other and
Hmm.
some other things. I was like, that sounds like a fun project. So that's something that we're thinking about doing right now.
Nice. Well, it sounds like, in addition to your day job being an artist, you have a whole lot of other stuff going on as well.
Yes, that is certainly the truth.
Right. Well, thanks, Jacob, for taking the time for joining us on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure having a chance to talk with you and get to know you better.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.